So my job today is just to give a really quick introduction to kind of set the context and frame for our thinking. So I'm going to try to do that pretty briefly. At Rare, where I come from, our central premise is that virtually across the board, environmental challenges are fundamentally behavioral challenges. And circular economy initiatives are a prime example of that. In order for a circular economy to function, people really up and down the chain of production and consumption are going to have to change the way that they interact with products. So things like sharing, reusing, repairing, refurbishing, recycling, these are all behaviors that are going to need to be adopted by people who aren't currently doing those things or doing enough of them. And so motivating, persuading, and enabling consumers, producers, and decision makers to change is going to be the central challenge of promoting a circular economy, in my view. But that's easier said than done. And let me give you an example why, by way of a quick illustration, similar to the question you just answered, that's borrowed from our friends at the Behavioral Insights team in the UK. So in just a moment, we're going to put up a poll for this on the screen, but let me read you the question I want you to consider. So you're about to buy a new phone charger, and I apologize, I know only a few of us on the phone are in North America, but you can imagine this is euros or other denominations. For $21.99, when you learn that the exact same charger is available for $12.99 at another store 10 minutes walk away, would you walk to the other store to get the cheaper phone charger? Just answer yes or no in the poll that I think is about to come up. I can't actually see whether the poll has come up because I'm screen sharing. Let me know if that's not.
The poll has come up, and so far about 90% have said yes, and about 12 have said no. So 88-12.
Okay, so about 90%, about roughly 90% have said yes, they would walk to the other store to get the cheaper phone charger. Okay, I'm going to ask you a second question, and I want you to be honest. You're about to buy a new MacBook. Of course, you should be buying a refurbished MacBook, but we'll put that aside for the moment. For $1,329, when you learn that the same MacBook is available for $1,320 at another store 10 minutes walk away. Now, be honest, would you walk to the other store to get the cheaper MacBook? Hopefully the poll will come up for this one as well, and you can let me know what results we see here.
Yeah, the poll is up, and so far 30% say yes, and about 70% say no.
Okay, so we see a big difference here. In the first case, we had about 90% saying yes, they would walk to get the cheaper phone charger. And the second case sounds like we're hovered around 30% saying yes, they would walk to get the cheaper MacBook. Incidentally, that latter number is a higher percentage than we usually see, but still quite low in comparison to the first question. And this is interesting, probably in ways that are obvious to many of you, but essentially it's interesting because in both cases, I asked you basically the same question. Would you walk for 10 minutes to save $9? A neoclassical economist would argue that it would be pretty irrational to answer these questions differently, but of course we all understand that it wasn't really the same question because the context was different, and it seems very natural, very human, you might say, for us to interpret the question differently based on the relative quantity of the savings to the overall cost. So there are other factors that we're taking into account, whether consciously or not, when we look at these two decisions. The broader insight that this illustrates is that people are complicated. We have a really we have an entire spectrum of decision making, from effortful, deliberate, calculating, to automatic, reactive, even pre-wired, and this spectrum really exists within all of us. But overwhelmingly, our approaches to motivating behavior change, particularly in the case of environmental challenges, don't really reflect that. We like to say the most common tactics for behavior change are designed for one kind of thinking, for really only one side of this spectrum of decision making. And so the conventional wisdom says that, if we want someone to change, we can pay them, thus changing the material incentives. We can stop them by changing the rules, or we can tell them some facts they maybe don't already know, and hope that does the trick. And for reasons we already demonstrated, that doesn't always do the trick. Sometimes it works, but just as often it doesn't. Financial incentives can backfire. Rules can be difficult to enforce, especially when they don't align with norms. And correcting what's known as an information deficit rarely changes minds, let alone behavior. And I'm sure we can all think of examples in our modern life where that's the case. The really good news is that a revolution in the science of human behavior, and it really is a revolution, has availed us of a broader understanding of human motivation and decision making, and given us a chance to kind of expand on this toolkit for behavior change. So among other things, behavioral science tells us that emotions drive us to act, often more quickly or powerfully than our ability to reason. That people are social animals who like to cooperate, who take the lead from others that we trust, and that the context and timing of our decision making matters a lot, just as we demonstrated in the example earlier of walking 10 minutes to save $9. So this means that we have the opportunity to expand our toolkit for behavior change to include things like emotional appeals, social influences, and choice architecture, the design of the decision-making environment, not really to replace the conventional levers, but to give us kind of more to work with when we're trying to motivate, persuade, and enable behavior change. And I think really importantly for the subject matter we're discussing today, this doesn't just mean consumers or the broader sort of public audiences. It's important to remember that businesses and governments are made up of people too. For instance, a supply chain operator or manager who may be sourcing plastics and thinking about new plastics versus recycled, may not be thinking only about price. They may also be, driven by the emotional uncertainty of a new supplier. They may be driven by the long-standing relationship with a previous supplier, or even just, influenced by the fact that it's easier just to stick with the status quo. So this expansion of the toolkit means a lot more to work with when it comes down to picking and choosing, which tactics and strategies to apply in a given context, because a tactic that works in one place may not work in another. And the approach that we use at RARE to design an effective intervention or strategy is called behavior-centered design. And you can find a whole host of resources and tools for behavior-centered design, all for free at behavior.rare.org. So I'd encourage you to sign up and explore there. So with that context in mind, my job now is to hand it over to our colleagues at Delterra, who's done a lot of work and research on applying these levers to on-the-ground circular economy efforts. So looking forward to hearing about that. Take it away. If I can figure out how to stop sharing my screen.
Thanks so much, Kevin. Can everyone hear me? Great. I'm Cynthia, and I am, as I share my screen, I'll just mention that I am from Delterra, which is a relatively young nonprofit, and we are launching this initiative called Rethinking Recycling across the Global South that was incubated by McKinsey.org, the nonprofit founded by McKinsey and Company. So we have partnered with the Circulate Initiative to release a report that came out at the end of last year called Making Sense of Recycling Behavior, the Return on Investment of the Recycling Habit. So I'll walk through a little bit how we came to do that particular research to try and answer this question. Probably most of you on the call are familiar with some of the realities of recycling and waste management, but just to kind of ground us in some numbers, about 80% of post-consumer waste could theoretically be recycled or composted around the world. So these are materials that have markets today that we know actually how to recycle. We have the mechanical or technological processes to do so. But the reality is that the global recycling rate is estimated at around 16% today. So there's a real gap, which also means there's a real opportunity as well. And as Kevin just mentioned, there are some really exciting new behavioral techniques that people have come to focus on more in recent years, that appealing to sort of that social and emotional, the sort of more instinctive ways that we make decisions. And building that into how we design our recycling and waste systems could really help close the gap in recycling today. But it may cost more as well as we think about what is the additional equipment, what are some of the additional kind of design processes that we go through in order to do that. So the question that we were really posing ourselves for our own kind of selfish practical purposes as we implement our programs is, what is the return on investment for promoting recycling behavior? And what does that bring us in terms of the incremental new value of increased recycling activity through that behavior change? And how does that compare against the cost of doing that kind of deeper, more ambitious behavior change? So as a starting point, we would love to have more data from other organizations and other programs around the world, but we started with our own programs at Delterra and Rethinking Recycling. So we work in 3 global south settings. We work in an informal settlement called Barrio Mujica in Buenos Aires, Argentina. We work in a mid-sized industrial city called Olavarría, also in Argentina. We're working with the municipality to roll out recycling to the entire city. And we also work with cohorts of urban districts called desas in Bali, Indonesia, where they are also responsible for local waste management and are thinking about how they plug it more into the circular economy. So in each of these situations, we're launching recycling service and bringing access to recycling and composting to these communities for the first time. And that's really, we've learned that behavior change is really critical to build into that launch, to make sure that we're activating people's habits and understanding of what's expected of them alongside the infrastructure and the systems we're putting in place. We take a relatively common behavior change approach across these 3 very different locations, and we also track very similar data to kind of measure our progress. But of course, as the variations in the local communities and culture and norms, and also the constraints of our local partners, we employ different tactics to use those 6 levers that Kevin just mentioned. And we also, on the return on investment side, face different markets for recyclables and different kinds of material incentives for how much it costs to send waste to landfill or to dispose of it some other way. So we thought that across these 3 locations would be an interesting sample of, if we implement more ambitious behavior change, what do we actually get for it? So briefly, in terms of how we approach recycling behavior change for this kind of context, we think of it in 2 halves as well. We think of, on the right-hand side, is what you might call more traditional behavior change. This is where we are trying to embed more of those social appeals, those emotional appeals, really helping to provide some more nuanced information. So this is the top-down mass media campaigns, as well as what we might call bottom-up interactions, where people are really kind of talking face-to-face in order to kind of build that relationship, social relationship around recycling, as well as providing some, reference materials and other sorts of supportive resources. But we also have the opportunity in our programs to think about the supporting infrastructure. So this speaks a bit to the choice architecture piece that Kevin touched on just earlier. What are some of the equipment that we provide to each of the households? How often, and what's the nature in which the waste is collected? And how does that also form particular cues or make certain kinds of behaviors easier or more difficult? So these are things that we also tweak as well in the overall kind of behavior-centered design of the systems that we implement. And all of those, of course, end up incurring some sort of behavior change cost. And this is what we wanted to understand. How does that add up versus the environmental impact of the recycling that results? So how do we measure return on investment? So when we sat down with our data and started to think about this, we realized there are actually a lot of different ways to think about it depending on your audience. So again, touching on something Kevin said, of course, we're all different kinds of decision makers with different, kind of contexts in which we operate. So we tried to think of it in terms of a framework of, you could kind of define the scope of both costs and benefits narrowly or more broadly, depending on both the data you have available and also the decision makers that will be looking at this kind of analysis, who might be influenced by what they see. So at a very narrow level, you might think about, well, it's just the, the cost of printing the materials to run the behavior change campaign. And on the other side, it's strictly the revenue that you earn from the additional recyclables that you sell out of your material recovery facility. Or you could broaden that to say, well, we also have to account for the personnel hours spent on the behavior change effort, but we also might capture the cost savings from other parts of our waste management system, like the avoided landfill fees that, that come out of greater recycling rates. You could also think about the potential later costs, like if you're going to be doing follow-up campaigns over time to kind of maintain the levels of recycling, but also how could you monetize some of that ongoing impact into some sort of revenue stream like plastic credits or carbon credits. This is all within the scope of a municipal waste management system. So local governments' financials are most affected by this. But of course, we don't try to tackle recycling just for municipal waste management balance sheets alone. We're also thinking about how does this affect the broader circular economy. And here we also think you could add in, if you really want to scale up behavior change across multiple cities at once to really kind of create a regional boost in the recycling supply, what are the costs and benefits associated with that? What then is possible in terms of using idle capacity within the recycling economy? And you could also expand it even to societal costs and benefits. So even more broadly, like ocean pollution prevention and reduced public health risks, and what are new jobs and livelihoods created through this like more vibrant recycling economy. But then you might also want to account for the hours that people in the households, many of them often women, who are now spending, millions of these people are now spending their time sorting their waste into these different categories. So this is how we kind of tried to think about it. And so at this point, I wanted to pause and see, we focused our analysis in the local government area, so kind of the first three levels. But I'm curious if we could send up a survey of what are the most relevant stakeholders or decision makers if you were to do some kind of ROI analysis for your work.
So the survey's up. I don't know if you can see it, Cynthia.
Yes.
Okay, perfect.
And you can choose more than one if you are playing to different audiences. So I do see that so far we have a pretty even split across the board, maybe a bit more in the circular economy working groups or recycling industry, but also many of you work with or are in public sector. So great. So definitely there is a need for thinking about different lenses of return on investment. But I just wanted to share some initial findings of the local government sort of scope that we looked at. So key finding number one from looking at Delterra's data coming out of those three programs. Promoting recycling behavior can fortunately pay back quickly, especially when prices reflect environmental impacts. So this is where we looked at what is the value of a ton of waste that comes into the system as a result of our behavior change efforts. So you'll see that it varies quite a bit depending on, of course, local prices and markets and the waste composition. But just from the sale of recyclables alone, that's quite a bit of value. And then there's some additional possibilities for how you might monetize or think about the value of 1 ton of recyclable waste. So if we look at those different scopes, based on recyclable sales only, we found that on average, our programs take about 5 years, would take about 5 years to pay back the cost of their behavior change campaigns. So that's well within what a normal investor might think about in terms of, well, if I really want to increase the recycling impacts and the supply that's coming online for the whole circular economy, this seems like it might be an investment worth looking into. And then if we layer in the avoided costs, especially where there are significant landfill fees or transportation costs, that would drops down to around 4 years. And then more speculatively, if you're thinking about could we actually earn carbon credits for the avoided GHG emissions of this organic waste that's now being composted, or even plastic credits that are now starting to be offered for specific kinds of plastics we want to keep out of the environment. So the more we reflect the broader environmental impact of recycling, the shorter that payback period becomes. And then the second key finding we found is recycling behavior change costs less than technology-based alternatives. So one of our regional director of Latin America pointed out, well, it's not that we invest in behavior change or we don't, and we just kind of resign ourselves to not recovering this waste. What would the alternative be? We would be probably relying on mechanical processes to take mixed waste and try to extract the recyclables. So we looked at the cost of a technology called mechanical biological treatment, which does take mixed waste and try to pull out the dried recyclables as well as turn the organic material into some sort of compost material, and compared that against the cost of our behavior change programs. And interestingly here, we did find that activating recycling behavior at the source is much more cost effective than relying on technology to process the mixed waste. Now, we tried to make this as much of a apples to apples comparison as possible by saying we assume that this is the incremental cost above and beyond a normal recycling infrastructure system. So then you add the recycling behavior change campaign cost, and then you also add on the other side, what would it cost to, in addition to that, to put in a MBT system. So that also looks very encouraging for the cost effectiveness or the return on investment of people thinking about how do we increase recycling rates. And then the third most preliminary finding we found is deeper investment in community engagement may be correlated to higher recycling rates. This is just based on across our 3 programs at the time that we did this analysis. We saw that Indonesia, which was really investing the most per household, was also seeing the highest participation rate. There are a lot of different reasons for this, but we also saw that in the places where we were investing less per household, we were also seeing lower participation rates, even with some similar approaches applied. What's interesting about this is that investment per household is one way of looking at it, but if you look at from a per ton of recyclables recovered as a result of the behavior change, then Indonesia is actually not the most expensive program that we had. So that was quite interesting as well. And since 70% participation, that sort of high participation rate is really what we need to meet these recycling goals, the corporate commitments, the public sector targets for the circular economy. And so we're really thinking about, in order to reach that kind of 70, 80, even 90% participation in these communities, what does it actually take to do this? Now, as a quick update, we've had some exciting new developments from our HERO program in Olavarría in Argentina, where even though they're keeping their investment per household fairly steady, they're also starting to be able to achieve participation rates of over 50%. So we're quite excited about that and want to continue pushing this idea of how cost effective can we be through smart design of behavior change. That's the whirlwind tour of Delterra and the Circulate initiatives, thinking on the return on investment. So hopefully from this you took that it's really worthwhile to think of behavior change as an investment. We are thinking about the broader circular economy and the value that it delivers to that. And we should not shortchange it when we're thinking about how we design our behavior change efforts. So to learn more, you can download our paper. And also we have a couple new things coming out as well. Our next paper in this series where we share some practical lessons learned from the field of how we effectively spread recycling behavior. And also we're putting together an Excel tool so you could do a very similar analysis for any programs that you run by plugging in your own assumptions for prices and costs of behavior change initiatives and so on. So thank you very much. And with that, I will hand it over to the next speaker.
Thank you very much, Cynthia, for those practical tools and examples. We'll hand over to Carlos Trujillo from Universidad de los Andes. He's an associate professor for behavioral economics, actually, and sustainability. Does some research on sustainable consumption, especially in the context of poverty. and addictive behaviors. And he's also one of our partners or consultants within promoting sustainable lifestyles of the UN environmental program. So over to you, Carlos. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Ines, and good evening to some, good morning to others. It is a real pleasure to be here. So let me try to share my screen. Seems I need to hold on. So since I was using Teams, it seems I have to do some permissions here in my computer. So give me just 1 second. I'm sorry for this.
No worries. I might just briefly compliment that Carlos is based in Colombia. And what he's going to present is also part of kind of the first works that we as Coalition are also pushing forward in the context of circular economy. So there will also be a separate event to go more into detail on the results of the study. But yeah, Carlos will present some sneak peek, the first results of the study. If we can help you with anything, Carlos, let me know.
Otherwise, maybe we can already take a question. There's a question from Steve to Cynthia. Has your work been used to establish consensus amongst financial beneficiaries as to who pays for the communication to deliver that financial benefit that you talked about? Cynthia, maybe you can briefly answer that question while we sort out the screen sharing.
Sure, Steve, it's a great question. It is definitely our hope and ambition to use it more in these kinds of discussions of who pays, exactly to your point. I think that I can say that among some of the funders of circular economy and increasing recycling, especially in the global south, there's, as you know, already quite a bit of interest in behavior change, but maybe not as kind of tangible an understanding of this is a worthwhile investment. If you think about, if you were to create, a grant or provide funds of, so many millions of dollars, where, would it best go in terms of achieving the kind of recycling results that people are looking for. So we are starting to have some of those conversations. It helps that people already have behavior change as something that they want to be focused on, and this kind of helps them to understand, where some of those resources could go, and especially what sorts of practices in implementing that behavior change they should be looking for.
Carlos, if you still need a minute, I think the presentation is working, so we will save the other questions for the end. No, I cannot see the presentation yet.
No, I think we just lost Carlos. I think he's disconnected and connecting again. Maybe we can jump over to the next speaker and Carlos.
Yeah, Vanessa, maybe you can contact Carlos and maybe he can also share the presentation with you so that you can share the screen.
Exactly.
And in the meantime, thanks, Anna, for already showing your presentation. So the next speaker is Anna from the German Institute for Development, or the German Development Institute. And yeah, she will present a case study from Argentina. Very excited to hear about this success story.
Many thanks, Nicole. I hope you can see my presentation as I can with the starting page. I would like to present a project that we did together with local partners in Argentina. And I say we, that's the German Development Institute, Deutsches Institut für Entwicklungspolitik. Some of you may know us. We're a public research institute broadly working on topics of sustainable development, and mostly funded by the German government, and based on scientific evidence that we produce, we give policy advice. And in the area of behavioral change, we work together with practice partners. So, for example, municipalities or NGOs, which again and again has proven to be a key point of the success of our projects. In Argentina, concretely, we cooperated with the Municipalidad de Trelew, which is a city in Argentina, with the University of Heidelberg, and also with the behavioral unit of the World Bank. I would like to take the example of our project in Argentina to illustrate a little bit what the process can be when we're faced with a behavioral problem. Because it's all good and well to say we need to change people's behavior, but how do we really go about it? And we are of the conviction that any change in behavior and any intervention to change behavior must start with a thorough analysis of the situation that we find on the ground. So when we cooperated with Delterra, we went there and first of all asked a lot of questions to really understand the issue and to really understand the behavior of people, what they're currently doing, and also what we need them to do for the system to be working. And we found a system with differentiated waste collection from the curbside, with the Thursdays being reserved for recyclables. So people should put out their recyclables only on the Thursdays. The situation that we found was that this waste or these materials that were collected on the Thursdays could not really be processed. Only 2 to 4% of that waste could be processed. And you can see in the picture why that was the case. So that is the processing plant, and this kind of mixed together materials was what they found there, and they tried to fish out any materials that they could still use, but you can see that that was really little. So in theory, the infrastructure was functioning. We had a collection system, we had the sorting factory, but the human factor was not functioning. So So next, we looked closely at the target behavior. What kind of behavior did we need to see from people? And it took us a while actually to understand these two steps of the target behavior. The first being waste separation in their homes, but that was not enough. We also needed people to put out only their recyclable materials and only on the Thursdays. So no other materials on the Thursdays, only the so-called dry waste. And then we went on to analyze what kind of barriers might be existent standing against this target behavior. And based on that, tried to develop suitable interventions. And then we tested those interventions in a randomized control trial. So we identified 3 potential barriers. The first is knowledge of the Thursday. People simply didn't know that they needed to put out the materials that they separated on the Thursday. So we devised an informational letter to address that problem. The second, lack of motivation. People were not willing to separate or to remember the Thursday. So we added a motivational message, which was an appeal to people's compassion, let's say, with the workers in the plant, because we saw the working conditions in that photo. On the other slide, they were not good. And then the third was the barrier of having to remember to actually take the waste and put it out when the Thursday comes. So in other groups, we added a calendar where we marked the Thursdays to be the days when people should put out their recyclables. And to give you an idea of how these letters looked like, you could see a little bit of text and then highlighted the main message, only the dry waste on Thursdays. And then further down, we also showed the importance of the 2 steps of separating and putting the correct materials out on Thursday, which then led to the 2 different outcomes, nicely separated and recycled materials, as opposed to this kind of mixed mash of waste that could basically not be used anymore. And then on the back, we gave some simplified information on what is considered recyclable and what is considered non-recyclable, so that people, should that part of the information lack, also get this information. And here's the results. On the left, you see the control group. The control group received nothing at all. And the blue bars show you the results after 2 weeks. So 2 weeks after the intervention. And you can see that in the control groups 2 weeks after, about 17% of the people actually performed the behavior that we wanted to see. And in the intervention group, about double of that amount of households actually performed the behavior that we needed to see. You can also see that the informational treatment, which is the second set of bars, was as effective on average as the other treatments. So adding the motivational message, adding the appeal to compassion, or adding the calendar didn't really change much. So the message here was, okay, the information as such was obviously enough to reach the effect that we saw. What you can also see in the orange bars is that the effect was sustainable. So often when we design behavioral informations, they have an effect for a relatively short while, but then after a while, these effects taper out and we go back to normal or to the situation before. In our case, after half a year, we still saw mainly the effect slightly dampened by the fact that the people in the control group obviously also started to separate and put out their waste on the Thursdays to a larger extent. Now, what are the main lessons? In terms of process, what we did was, first and most importantly, we tried to understand the status quo. So what do people do? Why do they do it? What do we need them to do? So what needs to change? What could be the motivations and the barriers to this change? And then only start to think about how can we change the context in which people take their decisions to create the motivations and remove the barriers to our target behavior. Then the second step, the co-design and the piloting of interventions with people on the ground. Hardly anything is as important as the knowledge of the context. Really talking to people, understanding people, how they tick and what they need to change their behavior. Then the third step, test the interventions because the results can be surprising. You really would have thought that adding the message of, look, this is the impact of your behavior on people, actual people working in that plant. And you could really help them by not giving them your food waste, for example, to sort through to find the PET bottles. We would have thought that this has an effect, but it didn't. So the results can be surprising. And then the fourth step is what we're doing right now, share your findings so we all can learn. And something that I also learned in that exercise was, if done right, behavioral interventions can be very cost effective. In our case, it was actually a letter that did the trick. But to do it right, we need to combine, we need to bring together the knowledge on behavioral insights and the knowledge on the context about people on the ground. And that's it already. I will post a briefing paper which gives you a bit more detail on the project in the chat. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. We have Carlos back. I hope this time it works with the presentation. Carlos, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry for the mishap here with the presentation. Okay, so I think if you can, it keeps giving me some trouble. If you can, I just send it the presentation to you, and if you can open it.
Yes, please. Maybe you can start and without the presentation, and then I'll follow up.
Sure, yeah. Okay. So the idea here is to show you some things that we're doing in Latin America, specifically, as a source of our data. And basically, the idea is to show you the type of different research that we're doing. We've been working on different aspects of behavior change. Our work is mostly, you know, directed to consumer behavior, and specifically how can we change specific behaviors at the consumer level to promote precisely sustainable consumption. And so the thing is, when we approach, you know, behavior change, we have different options. And I wanted to, you know, complementing my previous speakers, what is really challenging is to find the exact place at which we want to make an intervention. So what we have here, I wanted to give you a brief outline of what we call the hierarchy of effects. So on one side, we have attitudes and beliefs and values, and those things, obviously, they influence behavior. But the problem is that they may influence any type of behavior, and tying a particular belief to a specific behavior is really hard. The good thing is that when beliefs change, you have long-term changes and you have a structural, you know, context for people to move massively to certain behaviors. Down the road, some motivations, we have different types of public policies. You can have eco-labels, you can have incentives, you can have the infrastructure necessary for people to do things. And that has been, you know, that middle step there has been the focus of most of public policy, I would say. And then in the right-hand side, you have actual behavior, where you have, you know, the possibility of finding precisely the behavior you want to change to influence. Here, the concept of nudging and behavioral economics has been really useful. You can intervene the choice architecture surroundings of any specific behavior, but the key here is that you have to understand precisely which behavior you want to influence and what are the specific triggers and what kind of biases are there present. So the thing is, as you move along this continuum, this chain of effects decay, and that's why you have the widely known attitude behavior gap. And people is highly concerned about the environment, but then their behaviors don't reflect this level of concern. So next one, please, Vanessa. Okay, so we've conducted different things here in the region. We had a huge survey a couple of years ago, and in which we focus on beliefs. So I just want you to know some basic findings. For instance, in the region, people who support social over environmental policies, they tend to report less sustainable consumption behaviors. So the kinds of support for public policy affect what people end up doing. What we thought and what we believe in climate change increases sustainable habits and purchases. Latin America is a region where people do believe in climate change. I mean, you have this at the 90% level. Also, people who perceive that their actions have an influence in the world, that also increases sustainable habits. Next one, please. Not every decision is in the control of people. For instance, decisions about housing and transportation, they tend to be highly disconnected from individual variables. And that depends much more on structure, that depends on the availability of different ways of transportation, etc. And last but not least, you know, the use of eco-labels is extremely low in the region. I mean, people is really not aware of these things as compared to Europe. So we need a huge effort to make people that they know eco-labels and they know how to use them. Next one, please. Now, in terms of other types of interventions directed to specific behaviors, more like nudging things. For instance, we have found that there are spillover effects that goes from the use of reusable bags to recycling. And that is interesting because then you can intervene what we can call simple behaviors, and from there, those spillover effects will influence the adoption of more complex behaviors. We have also worked on how to change the display of products at different supermarkets, and we found, for instance, that if you put the sustainable products within other sustainable products, that actually reduces the probability of choosing them. It's better to have them scattered in the supermarket, and that increases the probability of choosing the sustainable products. So these are very simple decisions that you can implement in a supermarket in this type of setting that affects the final decision. Okay, but that was just to give you some context to the actual the main study that we wanted to present you today. Next one, please, Vanessa. Because one of the most understudied behaviors is repairing. We have a lot of recycling, on purchasing, on energy savings. So the idea of this study was to move forward and understand, how to influence the repairing behavior. So we had a study that included both a survey and an experiment in different countries in the region. Next one, please. And we implemented both a survey and a field study. In the survey, we had, we replicated different things that have been done, and we adapted some of the questions to the region. And basically, we evaluated attitudes, beliefs, socioeconomic, and psychographic, let's say, facilitating conditions for repairing. And from there, you can, derive implications for wide public policy and, let's say, general strategies. Now, in the field study, in the field experiments, we try to focus specifically on the repairing versus buying decision, looking for the effects of some of the already mentioned potential influences, like social norms, personal norms, cognitive load, and let's say some dynamics of cooperation among people. And the idea is to derive their implications for much more specific choice architecture type of interventions. So next one, please. So from the survey, we measured a bunch of things. I won't go into detail here, but let's say that we wanted to focus on what has been called the 5 R's, of the participation of consumers on circular economy: reusing, recycling, refusing, repurposing, and repairing. And in the survey, we measured the first 4, and in the field experiment, we focused specifically on repairing. So next one, please. So first, I wanted to ask you this: have you ever bought a second-hand clothing? This is kind of interesting because this is a accepted behavior in Europe, but not so much in the region. In Latin America, still you have many barriers to buying second-hand clothing and what that entails. So next one, please. So we asked that type of thing. So let me give you just a brief flavor of what the survey said. In terms of the 5 R's, you can see that aggregating in the region, what people less do is reusing, and from there, recycling is more, repurposing is more, and refusing is more. Of course, this is self-reported behaviors. That's why we don't have an exact estimate, just the perception if I always do it versus I never do it. But that kind of this ladder of how intense this is kind of interesting. And as you can see, the answer in terms of buying second-hand products is still, the mean is similar in the region, but we have different dispersions in different countries. Next one, please. Next slide. Vanessa? Okay, we asked people about how, sorry, the previous one, you jumped to. Okay, so we asked them also how difficult it is for them to repair. The perception of these barriers is really important. And as you can see, in Ecuador, they perceive much more difficulties for repairing as compared to Honduras or Mexico. We also asked people the difference in terms of how much they expect products to last and how much time they actually use them. And that gap gives us an idea of how circular is their behavior. So we want to have that gap reduced. We want people to use the products as much as they expect them to last. And we have a positive gap, which means that people in the region are using products less than they think they should last. Next one, please. And we asked them how much they would pay for repairing. And as you can see, the mean for the region is around 20%, but we have very important variations in different countries. People is willing to pay more in Colombia and Honduras, and they will pay much more less in Mexico. And next one. So from the survey, we learned some things. I wanted to give you some basic insights. First, attention to social comparison is, something that negatively affects circularity. And then the way we use social norms would be very tricky. So we know social norms, they have an effect, but we're not sure exactly the direction of that, because people who pay attention to social norms and to be compared socially, they tend to behave less circularly. Also, promoting ecocentric beliefs seems to work. The perception of repair difficulty increases this gap between expected duration and actual use of products. And there is this female asymmetry in terms of consumer segmentation. I mean, we found that for women, these behaviors are much more easily found. Okay, next one. Now, let me tell you about the experiment. So the first thing that we wanted to do when we wanted to understand how repairing behaves and what repairing means, we needed first a way to understand what the repairing decision is. So the first thing we did was using, all the theory, all the behavioral economics theory. We basically modeled the repairing versus buying decision as a risky versus riskless decision. So buying a new product, which means not repairing, is a riskless decision. I mean, you get the benefit, it's more expensive, but you are certain about what you're getting. Now, repairing is basically incurring in a risk. Okay, you will pay for something that it may go well or it may go wrong. It is cheaper, but then you're risking not getting the benefit from your product. So from there, we set up the experiment in that way. So we frame it as a repairing decision, and people have the option to buy something new, okay, and any product, and hypothetical product, and they will receive certain amount of money for sure. Or they could repair, and in that case, they will give part of their gains, and after that decision, we will give them a dice, and by throwing that dice, the outcome of the repair decision will be revealed. And of course, as much if they could pay more, and as they pay more, they had a higher probability of getting the good outcome from the repair decision. So next one, please. Okay, so we had basically three. We have different treatments. I'll give you a very brief overview of what we did. But basically, we wanted to make sure that they have some environmental awareness of the problem. So in a basic decision, they basically had to decide between repairing or buying without any further context. For some people, then we told them that if they decided to buy new, we had a pack of seeds that we showed them to them. And if they decided to buy, the pack of seeds were destroyed in their presence. And if they decided to repair, we gave them the package of seeds so they could plant that in their garden or in their house. And in an additional treatment, instead of we count them, we told them how people previously make the decision. So they had to decide if 4 or less participants before them decided to buy, the seeds were destroyed. But if 5 or more people decided to repair, then the seeds were, given to them. So we gave them some sort of, social dilemma around the decision of repairing or buying. And we manipulated social norms, we manipulated personal norms, and we manipulated cognitive load in different ways. The next one, please.
Dear Carlos, I'm just keeping in mind the time. We should get to the end, but I think it's just a couple of slides. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vanessa. Okay, so you can see how in different countries the decision were played out. People in Colombia decided to repair more than in Mexico, for instance. You can see the price there. And here you can see how people decided from the 5 different options from how much they would spend in repairing, how much would that be. Okay, next one, please. So let me give you some of our conclusions from the experiment. So first, we found that environmental awareness is very important because it moderates the effectiveness of other interventions. So it not only works specifically as a factor, but also moderates other factors. One implication for this is that we need to show people in the packaging, the environmental effects of the decisions in a very vivid and clear way. Second, simple descriptive social norms seems to be effective only when this awareness is low. The moment environmental awareness changes, that modifies the way social norms work. So we need to take that into account, because then we need to like reposition buying secondhand and repairing as something that is socially acceptable, at least for Latin America. And finally, the effect of cognitive load shift from negative to positive, depending also on environmental awareness. Why this is important? Because people is making these decisions of repairing or buying usually under the time pressure, or they need to replace the good they are using quickly. So cognitive load seems to be something that is interesting to look at. Okay, so that's what I had. Thank you.